think, again, if I extrapolate this experience that I had, I don't like feedback. I don't like when you push back on. I'm feeling unsafe, right? Like,
Mm.
and so I'm either going to, ignore it, or
Yeah.
I'm
No,
just
thank
gonna
you.
X-nay on it, right? Well, I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
some of the leaders that I've worked with, right? And they have, and I'm not saying leader, I'm sure there's leaders that are the same way, that are just like, they make it clear in perhaps a subtle way or not so subtle way, is like, I really don't want feedback.
Well, what I think is interesting is there's definitely that. I also see I openly request feedback. I frequently ask for feedback. I solicit proactively feedback, but I don't emotionally regulate when I receive it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there could be the declaring or sort of whether subtly or overtly saying, I don't want feedback. But I also see people asking for feedback, but not being prepared for a way to receive it that is productive, that encourages future feedback engagements
Mhm.
because I want it, please give it to me, and then I'm not prepared for emotionally how I'm going to feel about it. And
Mhm.
that's something that I really had to work through for myself. Is like I regularly ask for feedback. What I noticed having done sort of that work on the psychological safety, psychological maturity, discrepancy. The safety is I feel safe in asking you for feedback. The maturity is I'm ready to self manage what happens within me when I receive that feedback, especially if it's not what I was prepared for.
Hi, and welcome to the Pause Before You Lead. I'm Alicia Saint.
And I'm Heather Haig.
Together, we've both led teams inside large organizations, and over the past decade, we've coached and partnered with hundreds of leaders and teams navigating complexity. We've seen, felt, heard, and supported leaders through the challenging and sometimes really messy parts of leadership. And while a lot has changed, many of the patterns that quietly take leaders off track just keep showing up.
We work with leaders who don't want to lose momentum, but who know that clearer thinking is what makes momentum sustainable. This podcast is for leaders who are moving fast, leading teams, and making decisions under constant pressure. And leaders who know there's a better way to think, lead, and respond in those moments.
Each week, we bring you real conversations drawn from our work with leaders and teams, where speed matters, stakes are high, and the quality of your thinking shapes everything. So in each episode, we're going to pause, just long enough to think more clearly, to see what's really going on, make better decisions, and build high-value teams.
Whether you're listening before the day takes over, on your way to work, or in the middle of a full day, this is your pause without losing momentum. So, before we begin, take a breath and join us. Welcome to the Pause Before You Lead podcast. I'm Heather Haig.
I'm Alicia Saint.
And this episode 8, we're talking about psychological safety and psychological maturity. And we're by no means experts in the space of psychological safety. There are many experts that we draw upon when we're having these conversations with leaders, whether it's Amy Edmondson or Timothy Clark's model. There's a number of incredible resources with great expertise in the space of psychological safety and psychological maturity. Our intention today is to share some of the insights we've seen as leaders ourselves and as working with leaders in a coaching capacity and teams where the importance of psychological safety and psychological maturity keep showing up. So we know a lot of organizations are very focused on the importance of psychological safety. It's a topic of great importance. and a topic of frequent conversations around. So we're going to explore it in this conversation, encourage you to be thinking about yourself as a leader, working with your team, working across your organization, and how psychological maturity is showing up for you. Alicia, I know you've got a story to lead us into this conversation today.
Yeah, that sparked this for at least for me. And it was a recent conversation actually I had with my stepdaughter, and we were talking about Dunkin' Donuts. Okay. And she is super excited that Dunkin' Donuts is coming to Canada. And she goes on to tell me about all the reasons why Dunkin' Donuts is fantastic, can't wait for it to come, and how she hates Tim Hortons. And I was like, wow, okay, well, here's why I think it would be not a great thing if Dunkin' Donuts wiped out Tim Hortons. We don't have to go into all the specifics, but it was just we had two different opinions and we were both holding them fairly strongly. And so, in my coach like way, I was encouraging her to say more and tell me, why she felt so strongly. And then I would offer why I felt so strongly. And we were having a bit of a banter back and forth. And then I noticed that she was getting very emotional and she was getting more exasperated and a little more agitated and a little bit more fed up, I think would be the word. And then she just goes to a point. She's like, you know what? It just doesn't matter. I really don't care that much. I was just bringing it up. But, I don't like, I'm finished with this conversation and it, I'm done. I don't really care that much. And I said, wow, well, I think you do, or you wouldn't have brought it up. Well, no, I don't. Now I don't. And the conversation we had after was about how do you have a strong opinion, which is great. Like, and she had a lot of reasons. So did I. And stay in the conversation so that, and this is where I'm drawing on my corporate experience. How do you create change and innovation and transformation? And if you can't hold those opinions and try and move, not to say that I'm going to say she's right or that she's going to say I'm right. It's not a right or wrong, but it's a, what else might come out of this? What might be possible? How could Dunkin' Donuts and Tim Hortons both thrive in the Canadian marketplace? What might that look like? What could be possible? Why would that be a great thing? That kind of a conversation. And so that was that whole psychological maturity because I started to think about, and leaders bring this too, right? It's hard these days because people are getting very strong beliefs and opinions about a lot of things. And there's a lot of talk about we're losing the art of conversation. We're losing and I would say it's more than conversation. I directly tie it into our ability to innovate and be creative. And in a time when we need it more than ever. Because so many things that, you know, have been tried and true are blowing up or not working anymore. So it was what we talked about today is this idea of like psychological safety says, I have my opinion. I'm entitled to bring forward my opinion. I'm entitled to bring my voice into the room. Absolutely 100%. And I should feel safe doing that. Absolutely 100%. And then the psychological maturity to say, wow, I'm noticing I'm really passionate about this. And how do you regulate to stay in the conversation for the better good, whether that's for work or for family or for a relationship? And so that was what I was really intrigued about. And I thought might be kind of cool for us to explore today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad. Thank you for sharing the experience you had with your stepdaughter. And it is interesting listening to it because I think there is almost right now, because of fear of upsetting someone, fear of causing tension or friction or potentially creating some discomfort, that difficult conversations aren't being had. At the same time, I also see where sometimes difficult conversations are being had and people are experiencing, I don't want to say extreme, but they're experiencing emotional responses that I think that the current environment we're in might be contributing to. So where me expressing a point of view could be experienced as an attack on someone's character versus seeing that the intention of that information is coming from a place of good, coming from a well-intended perspective. Like, I think right now we may be limited in our ability to give people the benefit of the doubt, and how is that also playing out in people avoiding having challenging conversations? And you mentioned how important it is for innovation and I would say for creativity as well, like that. And we know one of the things that we see teams struggle with is status quo thinking. And how do you stop status quo thinking if there's no willingness to be able to put some tension to create not necessarily conflict in an attacking way, certainly, but just like conflict in thinking to say there's different ways to look at this and not have it be a I'm right, you're wrong, almost, like a no and a yes, kind of those extremes of black and white thinking that we see so often. I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think that it is so much emphasis is placed on psychological safety, and sometimes it's at the expense of this psychological maturity, which I know the first time I heard that term, I had to spend some time with it trying to understand it and sort of figure out what exactly is meant by psychological maturity. Um, and the danger of creating like a false harmony at the surface versus getting deeper into finding real alignment. So, I think that sometimes conversations are happening at a surface level to try and keep it safe,
Yeah.
but not necessarily productive or useful.
Yeah. And I think the other place this shows up as you were talking was around giving feedback, right?
Ugh.
It's we've we've experienced it and we've heard it a lot from leaders is that whole well, I am who I am and I'm entitled to be who I am and I'm entitled to have my opinions and I'm entitled to um and and I think, again, if I extrapolate this experience that I had, I don't like feedback. I don't like when you push back on. I'm feeling unsafe, right?
Mm,
And so I'm either going to, ignore it or
yeah.
I'm
No,
just
thank
gonna
you.
X-nay on, right? Well, I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
some of the leaders that I've worked with, right? And they have and I'm not saying leader, I'm sure there's leaders that are the same way, that are just like they make it clear in perhaps a subtle way or not so subtle way is like, I really don't want feedback.
Well, what I think is interesting is there's definitely that. I also see I openly request feedback. I frequently ask for feedback. I solicit proactively feedback, but I don't emotionally regulate when I receive it.
Yeah.
And so there could be the declaring or sort of whether subtly or overtly saying I don't want feedback, but I also see people asking for feedback but not being prepared for a way to receive it that is productive, that encourages future feedback engagements.
Mhm.
Because I want it, please give it to me, and then I'm not prepared for emotionally how I'm going to feel about it. And
Mhm.
that's something that I really had to work through for myself, is like I regularly ask for feedback. What I noticed having done sort of that work on the psychological safety, psychological maturity, discrepancy. The safety is I feel safe in asking you for feedback. The maturity is I'm ready to self manage what happens within me when I receive that feedback, especially if it's not what I was prepared for.
Mhm.
And so there's a piece of this that I think becomes really um not to say that psychological maturity means we won't ever be uncomfortable. I actually think it's like, how can we normalize the discomfort in it and help navigate ourselves and support others through it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
Because those tensions aren't comfortable, right?
right.
Like
And
they're,
the flip
they're not.
is, right, again, going back to myself as a leader, a connector leader, harmony is like one of my top values, right? So always like trying to smooth out the conflict, trying to avoid the conflict, trying to keep the team all like liking each other and rah-rahing together, um, and over softening everything. Um, so in my desire to preserve harmony, I'm actually squashing the ability for innovation and creativity, which is another value of mine, right? I called myself a change agent. I loved it. A first person put up their hand to say, "You want to lead change? Yeah, pick me." So interesting, right? That you've got the awareness, and again, the pause. We invite people to pause. Is in the if you're pursuing the harmony and you're squashing the conflict, do you actually where does that get you? What is the outcome that you actually get? And I think it's important, like what you said, when we say conflict, we're saying healthy conflict, right? What is healthy conflict?
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to model for my stepdaughter was it's about facts and opinions. It's not saying you're a bad person for, being a cheerleader for Dunkin' Donuts. It's not saying that you're wrong. Right? It's, this is what I know to be true. That's what you know to be true. Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, can you see my point of view? Can I see your point of view? Yeah.
Yeah, just listening to it's funny because I recently put a post on LinkedIn about parenting lessons and how they apply to leadership. And for a long time in my life, I kept those two things very separate. And I was like, no, there's like parenting best practices and there's leadership best practices. But now that my kids are adults, I start to see like the merging of those things. And one of the tools that my husband and I were given when we were doing some work on our parenting was to say, I guess we see things differently, right? Versus I need to convince you, you need to convince me, but to actually be, I would say, mature enough to say, we can see things differently. And isn't that great?
Yes. Yeah.
Versus let me try and convince you or let you try and convince me. And so like there's that I think about in teams there being like a healthy tension, like that you can allow for tension
Mhm.
within the dynamic without everything falling apart and the team being broken and there being something that needs to be fixed. And that to me is kind of that maturity level where you say, I understand myself well, which I think we're seeing a shift in leadership where a lot there seems to be a lot more investment in people understanding themselves as leaders, as individuals. There's more like I'm invested in some self-awareness, which is great progress from when I first got started in my professional career. You never heard that kind of language back then. So it's exciting. And to take it that step further to say, what am I responsible now that I know this about myself, what am I responsible for in that knowledge?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? So if I am a person who, when faced with conflicting perspectives, starts to try and convince others because I love a healthy debate. I love diving in. I want to just like get into that and right, just hold my position and fight back and argue and that's if I know that about myself, then I have to consciously manage and say, how helpful and productive is that in this environment?
Mhm.
Is that useful?
Mhm.
Or can I just come to the place of saying, I guess we can agree to disagree?
Mhm.
I guess we see things differently. And that
Mhm.
shift from old things that would just be, well, you just need to deal with this about me, Alicia, because this is who I am.
Yeah. 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 And you can hear the paradox, right? So the paradox in, this is who I am and this is why I'm great. And no, you can't change me. And no, I'm not going to, believe something else or have different opinions, right? It's like there's magic in the middle. There's growth
Mm.
in the middle, right? There's discomfort, but there's also a lot of potential and growth in there. And I'm just thinking about how we encourage teams to have team agreements. And I'm just thinking, like, even one specifically around How are we going to operate as a team when when disagreement arises? And
Mm.
how do we hold it as a gift and not as a sword? What would it make it feel like we can hold that disagreement as a gift?
And I'm curious about how many teams are having that conversation, how many leaders might be, um, encouraging that discussion around, like, what's the line that allows people to feel safe, to feel heard,
Mhm,
um, and where they're like, where's the line between, that healthy tension or, right, having difficult conversations that aren't putting someone in a state of emotionally where they feel like
mhm.
they can't operate.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
they need to so, like, what are those agreements that a team sets that says, "We want there to be healthy tension, we want challenge on ideas, and we are all in agreement that," right, it's about the topic, not the person. So here's how we'll respond if it
yeah,
feels like someone's character is being criticized versus focusing on the thing,
yeah,
like, having some of those great
yeah,
team agreements for
mhm,
operating,
yeah.
and
Assume positive intent, always assume positive intent, right?
yes, and be able to say, like, for someone to be able to say, I'm not feeling safe right now," and for that there not to be judgment in that, and for there to be, like, an ability to pause and say, "So how as a team do we need to proceed knowing that
Mhm, mhm,
this is something we've come up against?"
mhm. Yeah, so that everyone has a very clear picture of what is psychological safety, psychological maturity as a team, how we're gonna operate in this space, what is cool, what is okay, what is not okay. So that if it crosses the line, then hey, as a team, we've agreed that this is the culture, the environment that we wanna create. I'm noticing. Do we need a break right now? What would be helpful to this? What would be helpful for us right now?
Yes.
Feels like the pot's boiling over.
Well, and I think part of that collective responsibility is also to recognize that uncomfortable doesn't mean unsafe.
Right.
Right? So how can we distinguish between this is uncomfortable
Right.
and this is not safe?
Yes.
Because I think sometimes the fear is I don't want anyone to not feel safe, so we can't make anyone uncomfortable. And it's like, but uncomfortable is where growth happens.
Growth
So if we're going to innovate, if we're going to challenge our status quo thinking, there is going to be discomfort in that.
Yes, it has to be. There has to be. Or you're not challenging status quo.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's such a richness of opportunity to explore this, and as we're sort of bringing the conversation to a close, Alicia, what's a best practice we can sort of pass on to leaders as they're thinking about,
Mm.
the role they can play in psychological maturity on their team, in themselves and on their team? I
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's exclusively one or the other.
Yeah, I might offer just, in sharing my story for the leader to just take a moment to pause and reflect on what's happening in your teams, right? Is there healthy debate? Is
Mm.
there, some tension? Is there some challenge? Like, is there? So I think there's a pause to just say, wow, because if there isn't, it is a maturity, it's safe, it's emotional suppression, it's innovation, it's ideas are being suppressed, right? Status quo won't be challenged. Mistakes are okay, you know. uh,
Yeah.
it's yeah, and just really being clear, like conflict comes up, it's constant, right? So who do we want to be as a team? How do we want to operate? What's a way that this feels safe and healthy and productive for us as a collective system? And no one leader can define that, right? It's got to be
True.
collective.
Which requires a discussion about it,
That's
right? Not avoidance of the topic, but an actual discussion around that says, what are our agreements and how we wanna operate as a team? And knowing that, us avoiding tension doesn't move us forward. So how can
Mhm.
we navigate it in a way that will work for us?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like we'll come back to this topic
Okay.
again because there just keeps showing up. But you know, think about what this means for you.
Mm.
Reflect on where the opportunity is and know you're not responsible for all of it, but you set the tone for the team. So if you're not leading that conversation, what's the next conversation you want to have on your team to start to get some clarity around how psychological maturity can support you?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Alicia.
Until next week.
Yeah. Don't forget to pause before you lead.
Lead.
Thanks for joining the Pause Before You Lead. If this conversation sparked something for you, share it. Because more leaders need space to think clearly in the moments that matter.
Follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and let us know what's on your mind. We shape these conversations for you.
Before you move on to what's next, pause. Just for a moment.
And notice what might change if you led from here.